So, dear students, in the previous lecture, we were talking about the classification of penalties according to to their gravity, and now we will move to another topic, which is the classification of penalties according to the right affected by the penalty. I told you that we have different types. Number one, the corporal punishment. The corporal, it affects your body, or the body of the inmate, so, or the condemned person. Now, what is the definition of such corporal punishment? He says that it is a punishment, and this punishment is designed to reflect a body a pain or terminate the life of the convicted person. يعني العقوبة الجسدية يا بيكون القصد منها إنه أحقق الإيلام وأوقع على جسد شخص ما اللي هو ال convicted person، الشخص المدان، يا إني أنهي حياته من الوجود by execution or by executing this person، الإعدام. Corporal punishment could be by death penalty. أقصى عقوبة جسدية ممكن توقع على الشخص هي عقوبة ال death penalty، عقوبة الإعدام. Or the hard labor sentence، عقوبة الأشغال الشاقة. whipping، جلد. الهاند amputation، قطع اليد بالنسبة للسارق في بعض الدول اللي بتتبنى النظام الإسلامي. In modern times, the only corporal punishment that are permissible is both death penalty and hard labor sentences. Okay, so these penalties are imposed to the body of the person, the convicted person, to reflect a body pain or to terminate the person's life. However, both of them, I mean, the death penalty and hard labor sentences, are rejected in the last decade. So, a lot of conventions, and there is a very famous convention which tends to the end of or the determination of the death penalty. Number two, we have punishments that do not reflect body pain. However, it leads to the loss of freedom and liberty of the convicted person, and it is called imprisonment. So it's a penalty that deprives the convicted person from his freedom by sending him or her to prison or to jail. So this is the second kind of penalties according to the right affected. So number one, corporal punishments, it affects the body. Number two, the imprisonment, it affects the freedom of the person. And number three, you have to add it yourself, it affects the pecuniary rights of the person، بتأثر على الحقوق المالية للشخص، واللي احنا بنسميها fines. For example, fines، الconfiscation احنا صدرنا له أشياء مالية. So confiscation and fines are considered as pecuniary punishments. So the pecuniary punishments are considered one of the types of the crimes according to the right affected. So it affects the not the rights of the body or even the right of the freedom. It is against the pecuniary rights of the convicted person. Okay, so this is the second classification of penalties according to the right affected or even the right that it limits. There is another type of the classification of the punishments according to their independence. So I'm going to leave this lecture regarding classification of penalties according to the right affected. I will leave it on the Moodle, so you will not have it published on the YouTube. You will find it on the Moodle. It is existed in the YouTube, but you have to look for it. However, if you need to find it easily, you just um, get to the Moodle and open your site, and you will find it on the Moodle right away. Okay. Before I give you the lecture regarding classification of penalties according to the what I mentioned, their independence, I'm going here to give you the classification of penalties according to the Palestinian law. In the Palestinian law, what are the penalties that can be imposed to the convicted person? Well, the Palestinian law applied in the Gaza Strip is different from the penal law applied in the West Bank, their classification regarding penalties. So we'll start with the penal law applied in the Gaza Strip. According to Article 37 of the law, classifies penalties into five types. So it classifies them into five types. Number one, the death penalty, and it is for felonies. Imprisonment, some of them for felonies, if it exceeds 3 years of imprisonment. Less than 3 years, then it is for misdemeanors. Less than a week, it is for contraventions. We have the fine. The fine is maybe connected with the felonies, the misdemeanors, or even contraventions. The compensation التعويض عن الضرر and the bill اللي هي الضمانة الكفالة يعني. فهذه تعتبر من قبيل العقوبات اللي ذكرها قانون العقوبات 74 لسنة 36 غالبا هي هذه العقوبات. However, Articles 14, 15 and 16 of the penal law applied in the West Bank classify, I don't know, classify this. Classify, not classify. Simply, we're talking about three articles. However, here we have one article. He says classify, not classifies. So it must be classifies here. However, here it's classify. So it classify the penalties in more details as it differentiate between felonies, misdemeanors, and fractions with regard to the penalties. قانون الضفة الغربية حط كتير تصنيفات، لكن التصنيفات أدرجها ضمن طوائف وأنواع الجرائم. فقال لي بالنسبة للفيلونيز ما حطهمش عامين زي هنا وانت نقي لحالك انت افهم لحالك عمين بنطبقوا. انا حط لي الفيلونيز، قال لي بتشمل عقوبة الديث بينالتي، اللايف تيرم هارد ليبر، الاشغال الشاقة المؤبدة، وغالبا الحكم فيها بيكون more than 15 years of imprisonment. life term detention life term detention الحبس مدى الحياة بس بكونش فيه hard labor. Okay, it is called reclusion perpetua. The sentence here is more than 15 years. The difference is that there is no hard labor. So death penalty, hard labor, lifetime detention without hard labor. Then temporary hard labor. So the difference between 4 and 2 is that this one is lifetime, however, this one is temporary. So it is only between 3 years to 15 years of imprisonment. Look, Article 20 of the Palestinian Code 1960 applied in the West Bank. And finally, the temporary detention. So this is the difference between lifelong detention and this one is temporary. However, that one is permanent one. The temporary detention or the reclusion temporal, not reclusion perpetua. So this is the Latin expression for both kinds. The term of this sentence is between 3 years and 15 years. So it is the same as mentioned here in the temporary hard labor sentence. However, the difference is that this one is with hard labor, this one is just detention أو اعتقال يعني بسموه في القانون الأردني بس بكونش فيه hard labor. أما إذا كانت misdemeanor قال لي العقوبة بتكون jail or this is actually jail, no, hold the conviction the person for a period of time between 1 week to 3 years of imprisonment. عقوبة قال لي السجن وهي تتراوح من بين أسبوع ل3 سنوات. I'm not convinced with this name. We will I will show you the law number 16 for the 1960 applied in the West Bank after a moment. The fine, it is sum of money that the convict is obliged to pay for the state treasury. If the convict failed to pay the fine, it could be replaced by detention, counted according to the fine value but not exceed 1 year. إذا دفع الغرامة دفعها ما دفعهاش بيقيموها قديش يقابلها من الحبس بشرط إنه ما تزيدش في كل الأحوال ما يقابل غرامة، يعني في حال ما دفعهاش ما تزيدش عقوبته إذا استبدلناها بالسجن عن سنة، والبيل اللي هي الكفالة المالية. أما إذا كانت fractions فقلنا إنه يا بيكون سجن قصير المدة اللي هو من 1 week to less than 1 week، يعني less than 1 week to more than 24 hours. um, more than 24 hours or not less than, so more than. Okay, charging fines, relatively petite fine imposed on the convicted person. So this is regarding uh, the sentences or even the punishments that are imposed by the Palestinian legislations, whether the Palestinian law applied in the West Bank or even the Palestinian law applied in the Gaza Strip. Let me show you something. Um, so the law applied in the West Bank، عقوبات رقم 16 لسنة 60. أنا بدور لكم على هذا القانون. Account suspended. Okay guys, so I found it. So the law applied in the West Bank. خلينا نشوف ايش التسميات اللي هو حكاها في المادة 20. انا بعرف انه في عندهم اشي اسمه حبس تكديري للجنح، سموه حبس يعني، بس تعال نشوف. اوكي، سو هنا العقوبات الجنائية. في الجنايات في عندهم إعدام، أشغال شاقة مؤبدة، واعتقال مؤبد. الاعتقال مؤبد يعني ما فيش فيه أشغال شاقة. أشغال شاقة مؤقتة اللي هي من 3 سنوات ل 15، والاعتقال المؤقت أكيد حيكون معرفهم لتحت. العقوبات الجناحية يعني في الجنح الحبس اللي هو سماها جيل عنده، مع إنه هو المفترض إنه يعني تسمى ب detention or but it doesn't labeled, or it mustn't be labeled as jail because the jail is a name of place. والغرامة والربط بكفالة مالية. عندهم الحبس التكديري، وغالبا هذا بيكون في طائفة برضو الجنح، وممكن يكون في المخالفات. تعال نشوف ايش عرف هنا في المواد تبعته. الأشغال الشاقة تشغيل المحكوم عليه في الأشغال الموجودة تتناسب مع صحته وسنه سواء في داخل السجن أو خارجه. الاعتقال وضع المحكوم عليه في أحد سجون الدولة المدة المحكوم به عليه مع منحه معاملة خاصة، وعدم إلزامه بارتداء زي السجناء، وعدم تشغيله بأي عمل داخل السجن إلا برضاه. زي ما حكينا الاعتقال أو detention here. The detention which is mentioned here, even as he labeled as detention, so he is correct. He is correct. Let me see again. So life term hard labor sentence, it's correct. Life term detention, so it's called detention, but I'm not with this name. It must be called detention in English, not jail. However, the detention here is different from the detention here. The detention, when I'm talking about felonies, the difference between the detention here and the detention here is that the detention as misdemeanor, it is from 1 week to 3 years of imprisonment. However, the detention here, whether it is lifelong or even temporary, is from 3 years to 15 years of imprisonment. Okay. Um, to this, I end my lecture. As I told you, you just go to your Moodles and you will find the lectures regarding the classification of punishments according to their independence. After that, inshallah, in the coming lectures, we will be addressing the death penalty as one of the most آه، خلينا نقول إنه هي the highest, the most grave penalty or punishment that can be imposed as it terminates the life of the person. So we will discuss the death penalty as one of the uh, penalties. Uh, it may we discuss the other kind of penalties. However, we will discuss this one because it is the most dangerous one, and there are limitations, there are guarantees, and whatsoever. So we will discuss all of this, inshallah, in the coming lectures. Thank you very much, and goodbye.